all the hard work here with doing the data collecting and the assessment of the stream crossings this past summer. So what do we've got for time, Bearbell? If I could ask that, I just want to make sure we're not starting too quickly. I want to make sure our numbers look okay. And what time do we have here? You're muted, Bearbell.
It's 9:02, and we have at this moment 19 participants signed on.
Okay. Can we just wait maybe just a couple minutes if everyone, can we wait to 9:05 just to make sure everybody has just a couple minutes to settle in here? And as those that are on just have heard, we are recording the session here, the workshop, and that'll be put up on our website at oclw.org. So that'll be available for viewing afterwards if you need to go back to a certain section or to be able to download that yourself. We'll just give just a couple minutes here. I know we had about 35 people registered, and just want to make sure everybody is able to kind of come in before we get into the details of things. We'll go to a few more seconds here. When the clock chimes 9:05 for me on my computer, we'll take it forward.
Okay.
So hope everyone had a warm morning inside their house at least.
Not Bearbell.
Another chilly one tonight looks like, and then hopefully we'll move out of this.
Yeah, we're hoping to hit 0 today for a high.
Yeah, kind of a couple of cold ones. All right, I think my computer says 9:05, and looks like the sign-ins have kind of slowed down a bit. So I think we'll start her up here to try to keep on track here and get everyone out by 10:30. So thank you, Bearbell, for giving a few of the Zoom housekeeping notes. My name is Michelle Saduskas. I'm the Oneida County Conservationist, and I want to give a warm welcome. Notice the warm part of it. So a warm welcome to everyone popping in here and giving a little bit of their time to kind of see what's happening in Oneida County and what we found out there and how we had at it here. I do want to give just a little bit of background just to kind of catch the group up and just kind of put you in a place to where I'll let Joanne take it with the data assessment and the collection that we came up with. So many of you might have remembered back in 2016, there was a tremendous rainstorm up in Ashland County. I live in southern Ashland County, actually. Work for Oneida, but live in southern Ashland. And it was right above our house, just a little bit to the north, where that storm stalled and dumped about 8 to 12 inches of rain within just a few hours. Wiped out stream crossing culverts, bridges across the landscape. And we're not talking just little itty bitty roads. I mean, Highway 13 was down for months. The way into Ashland, you had to take a long way into Ashland for a number of months there. And I started thinking, could this happen in Oneida County? We don't have the same soil types. We don't quite probably have as many stream crossings and such, but we are a water landscape up here in Oneida County. And I thought, could this happen? What do we have out there? And maybe we should try to take a little closer look at things and what can we do to maybe be a bit proactive instead of reactive. So back in 2020, another neat thing that was happening is we had a chance to revise our 10-year land and water resource management plan, which was pretty exciting because I looked at our old one. It was pretty old. It was around for a long time. And so we updated, revised it, and we're able to put the stream assessment and looking at our streams a little bit more as a priority than we had in the past. So a couple of things came together. We went ahead and tried for a river planning grant. in 2020. We did receive that. That was a DNR grant. We did receive that. It was a $10,000 grant. Some of the money went into equipment. Joanna mentioned some of that information. And a lot of that grant went into having Joanne out on the field and in the field doing work. So a lot of staffing hours. And we did roughly right around 100 culverts somewhere in that stream crossing, about 100 of them that first year. And we knew we wanted to do more. That was about a third of the county. So we applied for another river planning grant in 2021. That one was a little bit less. We asked for $9,000. We had some equipment. We found out we needed a little bit more equipment. So our equipment costs were pretty minimal that second year, which is what Joanne will be talking about today. But most of the hours went into getting Joanne out into the field. So we were pretty excited about that as well. So we did about another third of the county. So what we have remaining is about a third of the county out there. We're hoping to get another award for a river grant. We'll see how that works out. We have our fingers crossed. But what was interesting this past summer was conversations really started to take hold with the towns, which is where we wanted to go. We didn't want to just be assessing and popping it into a data bank somewhere and there it sat. We wanted to actually do something out on the landscape. We wanted to see if we can give some technical assistance or financial assistance, help towns get in a better spot with maybe a larger culvert, better line culvert. And those conversations really kind of started up this past summer. Just a note, those were difficult conversations. Not that they were bad, but I think the thing that came up the most was the timing was just very difficult. We had two in our scopes that we thought we could help with. One turned out to be just a little bit over our heads. I mean, it was a floodplain. We had to have sponsored another grant to get a consultant on board. And we just weren't sure where we are at with that as a priority in the whole of Oneida County. And the other one just pretty much fell through last week. And I think I'm pretty saddened about it, but it was up in the Cashin area, Hazelhurst area on the Bearskin Creek. And that one was a trout stream, and we were hoping to have maybe a little larger culvert, maybe a better alignment. But that one had a really tough window of opportunity. There was a trestle project going in nearby, and the culvert was in pretty bad shape, and they needed to go, quickly. And trying to get a grant up and extra funding for the town would have delayed that. So we didn't have a lot of input into that one. So we're still trying, but just for the group, it is, I mean, that I think is probably our toughest. The conversations and trying to get the timing with, financial assistance out to the towns. But I'm happy to take questions a little bit further into the presentation. We'll have an opportunity. But I think that is where I'm going to leave it. Just thank you so much for coming. I'm happy to, as I mentioned, answer any of the questions you may have. And if it gets into data and assessment and what Joanne did in the field, those we'll send over to Joanne. But without further ado here, Joanne Lund, who is our River Grant Specialist, and I'll let you take it from here, Joanne.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Am I doing it? Can you see it?
Yes, Joanne,
Yes.
we see your presentation.
Okay, great. Okay, here we go. So thank you, Michelle, for that great introduction. I want to talk this morning about work we've done on the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory. This inventory is being done in Upper and Lower Michigan and various places in Wisconsin.
Hey, Joanne.
Yes, yes.
If you could hold on for 1 second, we've got,
Yes.
We have your main slide up, but we also have your second slide up. I'm not sure, we might want to,
Oh,
it might be a little distracting right now. We might probably go into display settings and get you maximized with one. I would try go up to display settings there. You see the display settings along the top?
Yes.
Yeah, give that a try. I'm
Duplicate
not sure.
slideshow.
Bear Bell, I'm not.
How about that?
100%. Give something.
Yeah,
Give something
now
there.
we're seeing your second slide now.
Oh,
Okay, that
okay.
looks good. I think just
Okay.
back up and I think we're
Yes.
good.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
There
I've
we
got
go.
2 monitors here, so not used to that. Okay, yeah, this, I'm gonna be describing our contribution to the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory from this past season, surveys conducted between June and August. And as Michelle said, my name is Joanne Lund. I'm the River Grant Specialist for Oneida County Land and Water Conservation based here in Rhinelander. So a little bit of housekeeping. The survey protocol we used was developed and tested by various organizations, including Michigan DNR, Wisconsin DNR, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Trout Unlimited, Huron Pines Conservation Resource Alliance, Michigan Tech, and various road commissions. And funding for the development and testing was provided by the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Nature Conservancy. We used a Survey 123 application that was developed by the, and the database is managed by the Michigan DNR, and this is what the opening page looks like when you're going to start collecting data at a site. So what's our interest in roadway stream crossings? Our goals are to prevent and or minimize environmental damage, reduce public safety issues, prioritize the culverts in the project area. We'd like to provide information to infrastructure managers to help them build more resilient and environmentally friendly stream crossings, and to provide information on future cost share opportunities when the decisions made to repair or replace culverts. So far, I don't know, I've got some stuff that popped up. Anyway, we began this project in 2020 when 105 surveys were conducted in 6 towns in Oneida County: Hazelhurst, Lake Tomahawk, Little Rice, Lynn, Minocqua, and Woodruff. And then we were able to continue these surveys in 2021. 90 crossings were completed in Crescent, Enterprise, Monaco, Pelican, Peel, and Shepke. Also, in this last 2021 season, we did a river mussel monitoring program, and I will talk about that toward the end of this presentation, about the importance of river mussels to healthy waterways. And we are hoping to secure funding for 2022 to complete the remaining 8, to complete surveys in the remaining 8 towns in Oneida County, which are Cashin, Newbold, Nokomis, Pine Lake, Stella, Sugar Camp, 3 Lakes, and Woodboro. So if we look at the ideal stream crossing, we would want it to mimic the natural stream as much as possible. So it should be as if there's a river flowing completely unimpeded and unobstructed with a roadway over the top of it. So it needs to allow water and debris to flow downstream unimpeded. It needs to allow aquatic organisms to move upstream and downstream as their life cycles require, and also needs to allow high volumes of water and debris to move downstream after heavy rainfall events. So how did we do it? We made use of the excellent maps on the Wisconsin DNR Surface Water Viewer. The address is here down below. Went to look at maps in the target towns and listed the crossings, and then made on-site visits to survey those crossings between June and August of 2021. So we completed 90 surveys, as I said, in 2021. They're in this red circle here in the southeast corner of Oneida County. The yellow circles are culverts, the red squares are bridges, and the pink icon represents dams. These are the numbers in each town, and we also surveyed 2 crossings of special concern that Michelle mentioned, one in Stella and one in Cashion. So when we look at the results, I'll be talking about 92 crossings because of that. So in 2020, we surveyed these 105 crossings. So what do we do when we're conducting a survey? It starts out with photographs of the structure itself, the banks, upstream and downstream conditions, and left and right approach of the roadway. We also did a variety of measurements, including stream flow velocity, water depth, bank and roadway slope, measurements on the actual structure, and a visual condition assessment. We measured buried depth of the structure, and this is important because the depth of the water inside the structure is a direct reflection of the buried depth. We looked for any visible erosion at or near the structure, and then a few other measurements. So to measure stream flow velocity, I used a flow probe like this one. Bank and roadway slope, we measured with a laser rangefinder such as this. It measures distances greater than 30 feet, and it can also measure the vertical distance between 2 points. It's a hypsometer if I needed that. We have another type of laser measure, this one for distances up to 30 feet. And then again, this is the opening page of the application. And I just want to mention, if anybody is thinking of doing these surveys, I initially thought it seemed like madness to walk in a river with all these electronic devices on me. But you know, the alternative is to record it on paper and then transpose it all. And then you'd have to catalog your photos and upload them. And so it's really an incredibly immense time saver to enter the data in the app, using the app directly. And then immediately when you're done, it gets uploaded to the database and it's available to the public. It's pretty slick. I thought we would start out by looking at sort of a medley of different kinds of conditions that we ran into, just so you have an idea of what a day is like, a day in the life of a culvert surveyor. These are 2 sites where erosion was an issue. You can see there's no riprap at all around this culvert, and gravel from the roadway is clearly making its way into the waterway and the structure itself. This one has a little bit of herbaceous vegetation, but gravel also in rain events is making its way into the waterway. These 2 are examples of structural condition issues. This one had some shape distortion, tearing, and rusting. And this one was completely squashed flat on one end. And, you know, clearly that would not be an efficient conductor of water. Here's some partially blocked blocked culverts. This one, they used blacktop as a riprap, which is good, but some of it fell into the structure and hardened there, so it formed a permanent partial blockage. At these two culverts, there was a big pileup of muddy and woody debris. These are examples of perched structures. And what we mean by that is the outlet end is located above the water surface heading downstream, such that the water needs to cascade to carry on. And this is clearly poses a barrier to fish and aquatic organisms that may want to or need to move upstream. Another issue here is the insufficient size of the structures. Ideally, we would want to see a structure that's the same width as the waterway. For assessing priority sites, we used a structure width of at least half the width of the waterway, and clearly these are undersized for the waterway where they're located. More structural condition issues. This culvert is rusted through and torn. This one, the entire bottom through the whole length was rusted away. More blockage issues. Here, someone had made sort of a makeshift trash rack, and you know, clearly that would lead to debris piling up. This was on the inlet side. And here at this crossing, the inlet was nearly completely blocked with a pileup of woody debris. And more blockage issues. This culvert had a tree growing in front of it, some logs wedged inside. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's a segment that detached back here and it was hanging off to the side. This one had some large branches lodged inside the structure. These are two examples of insufficient buried depth. So when they're not placed deeply enough, it leads to insufficient water depth for aquatic organisms. This one had a really nice head wall and wing walls, but sadly it just had insufficient water depth. At this site in Shepke, there were multiple issues. There were 3 culverts at the site. This one had shape distortion and it was rusted through. This one was rusted through along the bottom of the culvert. And then a third plastic culvert had been placed alongside the first 2. But the buried depth was extremely insufficient, such that the traffic riding over the culvert had worn away all of the gravel, and the culvert had become detached, and gravel was eroding into the inside, into the middle of the structure. Here's an example of issues with road core integrity. This side of the road is badly worn. And another culvert with insufficient buried depth. So the depth of water in the structure is extremely minimal. And also they did place some riprap, some rocks for riprap, but it was partial, so that you can see that gravel from the roadway is clearly making its way into the waterway. And then here's 3 examples of structures that didn't have issues. They're all in good condition. They're fairly wide relative to the width of the waterway they serve, and they had adequate water depth. So I put this slide in just to remind us all of the incredible variety of organisms that use and rely on our waterways um, for shelter, for finding food, for mating and breeding, and in the case of this fella, for recreation as well. And this is just a very small example of all the creatures that use the waterway and rely on it. While we were doing surveys, we also kept an eye out for non-native species and made lists of those. One of the most common is common tansy. It's got these feathery fern-like leaves and these tight little yellow button flowers. Aquatic forget-me-not is another common one, as well as purple loosestrife. And I had the occasion to dig up some loosestrife last fall, and they have really immense, tough, woody roots. They're tough to get rid of. We also saw some Chinese mystery snail, so we were looking for non-native animal species as well. And we kept an eye out for zebra mussels, but happily didn't see any, even though we know there are some near Oneida County borders. So when we looked at crossings, we assessed them on 3 basic factors. One was whether or not they posed a barrier to fish, aquatic organism, or wildlife passage, and this is termed passability. We looked at the structural integrity and condition, and we looked for signs of erosion at each site. So I want to talk about these 3 factors so you know what we were looking for. So passability, again, is whether fish and other aquatic organisms are able to cross a roadway stream intersection, both up and downstream as their life cycles require. We were looking for ideally a width at least equal to the stream bed width, but when we were assessing priority sites I mentioned, we were looking for the width of the culvert to be at least half of the waterway width. The inlets and the outlets should be positioned below the stream bed so that there's adequate water depth inside. And the gradient and alignment should parallel that of the existing stream. So the limiting factors in assessing passability were a water depth of less than 6 inches, water flow velocity of greater than 3 feet per second, the absence of a natural substrate in the structure, a structure length of greater than 30 feet, and a constriction ratio of less than 0.5. And again, this is the width of the structure divided by the average width of the waterway. Turning toward structural condition, the survey application has you visually examine the structure and then place it in one of these 8 categories, ranging from new or almost new or like new, ranging down to various degrees of corrosion and abrasion on various amounts of the surface area. And then erosion is very important at these sites. It can interfere with fish's ability to find food. It lowers dissolved oxygen levels. It can cause abrasion in the culvert itself, but also microparticles can cause abrasion in fish gills. It can fill in spawning areas, smother aquatic plants, and overall cause an increase in water temperature. So where erosion was occurring, we made measurements to evaluate the extent of that erosion, and that the application automatically calculated an estimate of annual erosion using the universal soil loss equation. So now I would like to turn toward an examination of our results. And so we'll first look at all of the surveys together and then break them out by town. And then we decided we take a break there before we discuss the priority sites and how we assess them. And then, like as I mentioned earlier, we'll discuss the muscle monitoring at the end. So turning to results for all sites.
Joanne, may I just interject for one moment?
Yes.
I just wanted to invite everybody again to post their questions.
Oh, okay.
As Joanne pointed out, that after we've gone through the results of the town, we will take some time for questions. And we're not actually breaking the presentation as in that nothing is happening, but this will be the time.
Yeah.
The first time we will address some questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bearbell. Okay, so this is a passability assessment for all sites. Among the 92 crossings surveyed, 14% posed a 100% barrier to fish and aquatic organism passage. 25% were not a barrier. 32% a barrier at high flows, and almost 24% a barrier at most flows. Looking at the structural condition for all sites, there was a nice block of structures in a pretty good, moderate to good condition, and a few with no deficiencies. And then a block with major to severe deterioration. And there was one crossing I went to survey where the road and the crossing were completely underwater. So this was in a state of partial failure. So now we will look at results by town. In the town of Crescent, let's see, can I move this? It's over my number. I can't move it. Oops. Okay. Is it 8? Okay.
It's 7.
It's 7. Okay. My little picture is right over my number, and I can't seem to get it to move. No. Okay. Thank you. 7 sites were surveyed in the town of Crescent, and those are located here. And this is a higher resolution map of those 7 sites. Looking at passability, 14% posed a 100% barrier to fish and aquatic organism passage. 14% were not a barrier. Almost 43% a barrier at high flows, and 28% a barrier at most flows. Structural condition in the town of Crescent was overall pretty good, from moderate to good, almost new. In the town of Enterprise, we conducted 26 surveys. Those are listed, or those are located here in the Oneida County map. And then here's a higher resolution map for those of you who know the area. Regarding passability, 15% posed a 100% barrier, 30% were not a barrier, 30% barrier at high flows, and 23% a barrier at most flows. Looking at condition, there's a good block in good to moderate condition, and then a block here with more serious deterioration. I should mention that piping is when water is able to flow under and around the sides of a culvert, and this weakens the integrity of the crossing. So it's not a good thing when you run into that. In the town of Monaco, we conducted 8 surveys. Here's a higher resolution map of those sites. I had actually listed about twice as many from the surface water viewer maps, but I found that half of them were not accessible due to bermed and gated roads in the town of Monaco. So 8 were completed. 25% were not a barrier, 12% a barrier at high flows, and 62% a barrier at most flows. And condition, there were a few that were in pretty good condition, but we had this large block that probably should be looked at, and plans being made for repair or replacement. In the town of Pelican, 25 surveys were completed, located here, higher resolution map here. In Pelican, among the 25, 20% caused a 100% barrier to fish passage. 16% were not a barrier, 40% a barrier at high flows, and 16% a barrier at most flows. Regarding structural condition, there was a nice big block, maybe about half that were in moderate to good condition. And then there's a block here that were showing major to severe deterioration. In the town of Peel, 8 surveys were completed, and they're located here on the higher resolution map. So in the town of Peel, there were no sites assessed that were 100% barrier to fish and aquatic organism passage. 50% posed a barrier at high flows, 25% at most flows. And this is the town where the crossing that was in partial failure was located. So when you can't complete all the measurements, the application can't complete the passability assessment, and that's the reason for that. Structural condition in the town of Peel, moderate to good condition here. 3 showed major deterioration, and then here's the one that was underwater. And in the town of Shepke, in the far southeast corner of Oneida County, we completed 16 crossing surveys. And here is the higher resolution map of those exact locations. Regarding passability in the town of Shepke, almost 19% caused a 100% barrier to fish and aquatic organism passage. About 44% were not a barrier, 25% a barrier at high flows, and 12% a barrier at most flows. Regarding structural condition, there was a nice size block in good, moderate to good condition, and then just a few that showed more major deterioration. And I think this is the place we decided to take questions if there are any. Otherwise, I will just carry on. We'll give you a minute. Because at this
There
point,
are questions, Joanne.
okay.
So, yeah, we have a question from Scott Lutke. Are there any circumstances when a culvert that does not mimic natural stream flow, say perched above the receiving stream, would not be considered for modification? Example are the culverts under Highway D below the Rainbow Flowage Dam from Gilmore Lake to Wisconsin River. It impedes migration of good and bad actors? Question mark.
So what, can you read the first part of that again? Are there any situations where
circumstances when a culvert that does not mimic natural stream flow, like it perched over a receiving stream,
oh, I see.
not be considered for modification?
Well, I guess I can't say there would not be. Usually when a structure is perched, it's automatically a 100% barrier. But, these are all guidelines. I mean, every crossing is different and there are considerations at each individual location. So, I guess, in that case, you'd have to assess that one individually. So yes, there are situations where you might want to take other things into consideration. These are just guidelines, like I said, not hard and fast.
Okay. Thank you. And then there's a question. You showed a photo where there were some metal bars
Oh, yes. Hmm.
placed over the entry of the culvert, and
Yes.
I'm wondering, what are the reasons for this human seemingly purposeful obstruction? Have you figured out any reasons, or what
Yes.
are you seeing there?
Yes. I think, well, I am assuming they were making a makeshift trash rack. So on some streams, you will have a purposeful trash rack placed to catch debris on the inlet side. And that's where those bars were placed. But when you do that, if you do have a trash rack to catch debris to keep it from blocking the culvert, it needs to be checked periodically. You have to make sure it doesn't pose a block in and of itself. So I'm assuming that whoever put those there was making their own homemade trash rack. But again, you need to monitor that then.
Okay. And then there's another question in reference to the photos of the mud piles in front of the entries.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to see whether that may be connected to a beaver activity?
Yeah, sometimes I didn't see too much of that in 2021, but there was a lot of beaver activity in 2020 out in the direction of Lynn and Little Rice. That particular photo, if I'm thinking of the same one, I think actually that had been kind of piled up there by humans in order to keep the water level higher on the inlet side, because there was a small pond there. So I think they just were trying to keep the water level higher, which, isn't ideal.
Yeah. Okay. And we have a comment
Mm-hmm.
from somebody from Golden Sands RC&D in reference to the photo with the metal bars.
Uh-huh.
That there's a possibility that those may have been placed to keep beavers from creating a dam right on the culvert,
Oh, that's true.
because it makes it easier to clean out the material they will be using for the damming.
Mm-hmm. Well, then they can't really get inside the culvert at all. Yeah. Well, and that's okay. I would just hope that they would return to check it periodically to make sure that that the bars themselves are not causing any kind of a blockage. But yeah, beavers they're out in the landscape and they're native. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. That's all the questions I have here in the written. Oh, okay, there's another question.
Okay.
Are trash racks allowed regardless of the reason if the culvert is under a public road and on public land?
I really have no idea about the legality of them. I do know that the survey app asks whether there's a trash rack there or not. So that leads me to think it's something that they expect might be there now and then. But I really don't know anything about the legality of that. I suppose it depends on who places it, perhaps.
Mhm.
But I really can't answer that. Does anybody else know? Maybe they can type it in the chat or something, and or later at when we take questions again. If anybody can help us out with that. Okay, should I proceed then?
Yeah, I'm not having any other questions here right now.
Okay. So this is the figure I showed for all sites regarding passability. And I'm showing this now because I'm going to begin discussing what we assessed as priority sites. And we made the decision to consider any site that posed a 100% barrier to fish and aquatic organism passage as a priority site based on passability. So the following slide shows a table of those specific locations. So here we have site ID, we have the stream name and the roadway name. Some of the streams that we surveyed were classified trout streams. So in these tables, those are marked with a trout. And we mentioned earlier the variables that we use to assess passability. And those are structure length of greater than 30 feet, water depth of less than 6 inches, whether or not there's substrate in the structure, a water velocity of greater than 3 feet per second, a constriction ratio of less than 0.5. And again, this is the width of the structure divided by the average waterway width. Whether or not the outlet end is perched above the water surface. And the scour pool is a function of water velocity below the outlet. So if that particular factor was contributing to this site being considered a priority site due to passability issues, I changed it to red. So let's just look at this site, Crescent Creek, where Melody Lanes crosses it. The structure length was greater than 30 feet and the constriction ratio was less than 0.5. In other words, the structure was undersized. And those are the reasons they are in the priority category due to passability issues. Let's look at another one, Pelican 4. The structure was greater than 30 feet in length, water depth less than 6 inches. The structure was undersized and the outlet end was perched. So those were the factors that put it in the priority category. Let's look at one more. Enterprise 14 at Zimmer Road. The water depth was less than 6 inches. The structure was undersized and the outlet end was perched. So that's how you would interpret this table. And that's how we assessed our priority sites based on passability. So now we'll turn to structural condition. So this is again that same figure I showed you, structural condition at all sites. And we made a decision to include as a priority site any structure that showed major to severe deterioration. So that includes these locations on the graph. And those are showed on a table on the following slide. And there were 37 of those. So we were asked, the app asked to assess the degree that the structure was plugged, the degree that it was crushed, whether or not it was rusted through, and then that general assessment of the surface condition, which is one of those 8 categories I showed earlier. So if we look at, let's look at the first one. So this one was not plugged, but it showed a degree of crushed, a part of the structure was crushed, and it was rusted through in places, and it showed severe deterioration over its surface. Let's look at another one down here, Peel, Twin Lakes Creek at Goggin Road. So this had major obstruction. It was majorly plugged. Had some crushing, but it was not rusted. And actually the surface was okay. It was just mainly this big blockage. And then let's look at one more, Shepke 8. It showed major blockage. Part of it was crushed, and it showed major deterioration over 10 to 50% of the surface. So that was how we decided to assess priority sites based on condition issues. So now we'll turn to priority sites based on erosion. Okay, so there's no universally accepted level of erosion that's agreed upon as, you know, beyond which structure would be given priority for that reason. So in consultation with DNR representatives, we chose near or exceeding 2 tons annually. And that gave us 3 priority sites this year based on erosion issues. Since there were only 3, I could picture all 3 of them on the slide. So we've already looked at these 2. I think you remember those. And then this site, which is also a trout stream, I think it's because it was a gravel road, there was no shoulder, and there were steep banks where gravel was making its way into the waterway. So Michelle alluded to this earlier. I also wanted to mention that in this past season, we extended our outreach to try to work with DNR representatives, DNR staff and town representatives at specific sites where there were issues with the structures. So those 3 were one in Stella, one in Cashin, and then there's also one in Hazelhurst. And we served as liaison with DNR staff and tried to offer cost share funding information, and we hope to expand these activities in the coming season. So to summarize our stream crossing surveys, to date, we've completed surveys in 12 of the 20 towns in Oneida County, and that comprises 60%. It's important to remember that the effects of all the culverts in the watershed are cumulative. So, you're not really looking, it's better to look at them as a group and how they affect the watershed rather than as an individual culvert. Our goal is to maximize connectivity on a basin scale while minimizing cost, and this in turn minimizes environmental impact. And our hope is that these data from on-the-ground surveys will be useful to infrastructure managers when they're looking at repair or replacement of crossing structures. All of the data from all of the surveys is available to the public. It's housed on this Michigan DNR database at this address. It's pretty easy to use. You go to the map, click on a particular location, and all the survey data opens up, including the photographs. And on our Oneida County Land and Water Mapping site, which is at this address, we have links to the same data. So you'd use it in the same way. Just go to a map, click on a location, and all of the data from this website opens here as well. So 2 ways to access the data. And I think at this point, that would complete stream crossing survey description, and seems like a big switch to go from stream crossing surveys to mussels, but I want to explain to you why we should all care that we have a healthy mussel population in our waterways. So they're really not that different, because with the stream crossing surveys, we're concerned with environmental impact, and the mussels are also important to the water quality in our waterways. So in case anyone is not really familiar with a mussel, I thought I'd do a quick description. Mussels belong to a group of invertebrate animals called the mollusks. There's 85,000 species worldwide. Invertebrate means they don't have a backbone. There's a really well-known group is the gastropods, which includes the snails and slugs. The cephalopods are also pretty well known, including the squid and octopus. And the bivalves, which includes mussels, clams, oysters, scallops. So bivalve means 2 shells. And these are soft-bodied animals that live inside the protection of 2 shells. And what's amazing about mussels is that they're like living Brita filters in the bottom of your waterway. So they feed by filter feeding, and in the process of just seeking food, they remove algae, sediment, nutrients, harmful bacteria, and metals from the water, and then they return the water in an improved state. So they're actually quite important to the food web of rivers. Because they're so sensitive to changes in water quality, they can be considered bioindicators. And this is what we mean by that is if there's a decline in the mussel population, it's a good indicator that there's some issue with the water quality. They serve as a food source for many aquatic and terrestrial organisms. After they die, their shells provide habitat for fish spawning and development. And this last one surprised me. I don't know if it'll surprise you, but most mussels require fish species to complete their life cycle for a specific stage of larval development. So I really want to emphasize how efficient they are at cleaning up water, and that's why we should want mussels in all of our waterways. And when they're there, we should be protecting these populations. So over here, I have a picture of a mussel, a couple of mussels. They live mostly submerged in the sediment in the bottom of our waterways. And so they'll take in water through this opening called the in-current siphon. They filter it and then they expel it again through the ex-current siphon. And in doing this, they're cleaning up the water. I want to show an example of how efficient they are. Here's a tank of 5 adult mussels next to both in murky water. And this is a time-lapse video of, see if it's, oh yeah, of 30 minutes of 5 adult mussels in a confined space. And I think you can see that the water quality is improving in a short order. So you can imagine if you had hundreds of mussels in a riverbed or even thousands, that they would definitely make an impact on water quality. So they have a fairly complicated life cycle, but I think it's important to understand this, especially this relationship between fish and mussels. So I want to start here with the adult mussels. They have separate sexes, so there are males and females. They need to live in close proximity to each other because the males release the sperm into the water, and then the female needs to take in the sperm through her incurrent siphon. The eggs that are fertilized are held in specialized pouches that are part of a specialized part of the gill, and it's called a brood pouch. So they're held in there until they reach a certain stage, which is called the Glaucidia stage, Glaucidia larvae. And then they're released into the environment, and they need to come into contact with their fish host in order to complete the life cycle. So they either need to be taken in where they attach to the gills, or some of them have little hooks or barbs and they attach to the body of the fish or the fins. I should also mention that some mussel species require a specific fish species to complete their life cycle, and others are generalists where one of several species will do. So then inside the fish or on the body of the fish, they go through more developmental stages. And when they reach the juvenile stage, they release, and then hopefully some of them eventually grow into adult mussels. Over here on the right, I have a picture of, this is a common species in Wisconsin, the plain pocketbook. And this pictures a plain pocketbook female. These are her brood pouches. And you can see they have become modified to look like little fish, like little minnows waving in the current. And thus they encourage the fish intermediate host to come along and take them in. These are another species of mollusk showing brood pouches. These are not fish. These are sacs of Glaucidia larvae. And so, and then this is another type of, it's like a sac of Glaucidia larvae that resemble larval aquatic insects. So these adaptations greatly increase the probability of being able to complete the life cycle. So because of this, if the fish host is in decline, then your mussel species that rely on them are going to be in decline. It's kind of like the monarch and the milkweed. So they need, the monarch can't make it without the milkweed. The mussel can't make it without the fish host. So the bad news is that Wisconsin's mussel population is in pretty serious decline. We have about 50 species in Wisconsin, and fully half of them are in decline or even endangered. Some of the factors contributing to that are habitat destruction, water pollution, and competition with invasive species. So our river mussel monitoring surveys were part of the Wisconsin Mussel Monitoring Program. This is their address. And their goal is to gain a statewide perspective on mussel populations through inventory of mussel species. And we were able to contribute some information to that important body of knowledge. This is what the page looks like, where we report our observations, our results of a survey, and that's on iNaturalist. There's the address. So I'll talk about how we completed these surveys. Again, this is that same photo of the incurrent and excurrent siphon. And so what you do is walk along in a waterway, kind of stir up the sediment. And then we used either a bathoscope or a snorkel or a mask and snorkel to view the bottom. Sometimes you'll just see like this figure 8 sticking up above the level of the sediment. We collected the mussels we saw for a specified amount of time in mesh bags, and then went to the bank and sorted them according to species and photographed them, and then reported our findings on iNaturalist. And here's that website again. So another map of Oneida County, we were able to complete 11 mussel monitoring surveys in 2021. They were scattered about the county. We made the decision which sites to survey based on a few things. One was we wanted to revisit some sites that had not been surveyed since the 70s or the 90s to look for differences. And then there were some other sites that had never been surveyed but were of interest. These are the waterways. And our results, the waterways listed in blue, town in green, and the mussel species we found there in yellow. Our results ranged from finding 1 type of mussel to finding 8 in a couple of locations. I just want to point out the colorful names they have. It's kind of fun and the incredible variety as well. So I put some of our photos up here. This is a Wabash pigtoe, for example. This is a black sand shell. This one is a 3-ridge. See, it's got these 3 ridges. These are known as fluted shell. It's here, fluted shell. They have this kind of a ruffled edge. This is an eastern pond mussel. This is a white heel splitter, and this is a plain pocketbook again. And with that, Michelle mentioned this earlier, but we will have a recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint on our workshops tab in short order. I don't know exactly how fast, but pretty fast. And then also on the Oneida County Land and Water website on our stream crossing survey tab, there will be final reports from 2020 are already up, but we'll post final report from this year as well as individual town reports from both years of surveys. And, oh, and then I have just a few references. Bear with me. These first 2 papers were worked on assessing the characteristics that lead to passability or that are used for passability evaluation. This is the these are the instructions for making use of the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory, where the data is stored. This is a really handy little brochure that has a lot of good information on building and environmentally friendly culverts. This one is a study similar to this one that was done in the Manitowish River headwaters a few years back. And finally, the Wisconsin Mussel Monitoring Program website. And that's about all I have to say, except for answering questions. I thank you for bearing with me and for your interest in this topic. Anybody there?
Yeah, Joanne, so questions, then there's one here.
Yes.
Does your work include looking for new water crossings where culverts should be placed, or are you focusing only on correcting and replacing existing situations that need it?
We're actually focusing on assessing existing culverts. So, you know, we haven't really worked with activities that lead to replacement or repair. We're just starting to explore that. Our main thrust has been assessing existing culverts.
Good, thank you. Are there any other questions people want to bring up right now? Okay. There's a comment that it's an excellent, clear, and interesting presentation.
Well, I thank you, whoever said that. I appreciate that. We all do.
Joanne, I do have one question.
Yes.
If you could pick one thing that was the most interesting or exciting thing with your surveys and one of the most challenging aspects of the surveys that you've done in the last 2 summers.
Are you talking about stream crossing surveys? Not mussel
Yes,
monitoring?
or with
Yeah.
the monitoring.
Oh,
or
okay.
The mussel monitoring too, either one,
Okay.
just kind of like a real positive and a real challenging comment, just for others that may want to be looking at what they're.
Okay. The most delightful thing, I think, was just starting to work with the mussel monitoring. On a day we worked with a DNR representative to receive training. It was stunning to me that the riverbed was so flush with mussels and I didn't realize they were there. And I spend a lot of time on or near the water. I'm an avid kayaker, and it was like every step we took, there were mussels everywhere. I had no idea of the incredible variety of their really amazing life cycle or their, you know, their key impact on water quality. So that they just stunned me, I guess. And your other part of that was the most
Challenging.
Most challenging. I guess the most challenging is probably that we have a lot of waterways where the sediment, the bottom of the waterway, is not very solid. So it's almost like quicksand. So there are very few that you can actually walk along in. And I've been stuck several times where, you know, the muck is pulling your waders off and you're, and I have all these electronics on me and, you know, you have to just kind of be very, very careful getting out. So I got very good at being able to assess the solidity of the bottom of a waterway, or at least inspecting it before stepping in, I guess.
I know on that note, with Joanne being out in the field, it was one of those situations where we tasked her with at least texting staff when she was wrapping up the day. You know, so it was good for her and it was good for us as a team. So that was also a consideration that because some of the sites that she was at were definitely out in the boondocks, and you know, and safety was a
Yep.
top priority
Mhm.
for all of us involved.
Yes. I might also mention, not so much in 2021, but in 2020, I was in an area where beaver traps had been set. And that was pretty dicey. But, you know, so extreme caution needed to be taken. And there were some locations where there were signs up saying that beaver traps were placed. So I just, you know, couldn't do some of the measurements. It's just too hazardous. So because they said, the sign said they were placed in the water and aside the water. So I do walk with a probing pole, like a walking stick. Try to check it out first, but so just be careful.
Great, wise words indeed.
Yeah. And there are just some beautiful locations. It's just great on a summer's morning to be out doing stream crossing surveys.
All right then. So I don't think we have any more questions, Barbella. Do you see anything at your end?
No,
Okay. And if anybody does have a question, I think we would be perfectly fine and taking a verbal question here if the text box or the chat box is just not your thing.
Mhm.
So we'll give just a couple seconds here if there is someone that wants to unmute and give out a verbal question.
Hey, Michelle,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Chris Hammerla, Golden Sands RC&D.
Hey,
I know you
Chris.
kind of stated, I believe, why Oneida County chose to do this project, but could you again briefly just restate maybe why other counties would be interested in doing this? I guess I'm curious. Obviously,
Sure.
you had a lot of rain and washout issues, and I think that was your reasoning. But
Yeah,
maybe other things. Why
yeah,
would a county
definitely.
be interested in this?
Sure thing. That is kind of where that developed from because of what happened to Ashland County. We've got a lot of waterways in Oneida County. I know other counties out there probably have more trout streams. We don't
Mhm.
have a ton of trout streams within our county. So that may be something for any of the counties that are, you know, online here. Maybe it's something that you have trout streams that you're kind of worried about or wanting to see how passability issues, if they exist, or how bad they might be. We wanted at it from what could happen and just trying to be proactive. We had an opportunity when we were revising our 10-year land and water plan to put that in and put that as a priority. And we haven't done, we're so lake rich. We've done so much work with our lakes, especially with aquatic invasive species in monitoring and that type of thing. We really wanted to up our knowledge of our rivers and our stream systems in Oneida County. So I know other counties might be in a little different spot, but it sure helped us get connected with the crossings that were out there, what was happening to those crossings, some of the conversations that we're having with the towns, with the DNR. So I think that's some of the things that we can really take away from it. We're in a much, much better spot 2 years afterwards about knowing what's happening on the landscape and having those connections with town officials, state officials. So it was a win-win, I think, for everybody involved.
Yeah, I would like to add a word, just that, you know, I think generally infrastructure managers are not focused on some of these issues that have to deal with, you know, watershed connectivity. And unless we provide some information on that, they're probably not going to consider it. And I think it's just very helpful moving forward to have those discussions. It's often not very much more expensive to set a culvert just slightly deeper to have a deeper water depth in the structure. And I just think it hasn't been considered very much in the past. And And we need to keep that communication open in order to improve these culverts from an environmental standpoint, or at least offer information.
Hi, this is Keita from Vilas County.
Hi, Keita.
Hey, I have a question, but I'm gonna just sort of jump in on the tail of what Michelle said. So Vilas County, we started looking at our culverts as well. Mostly originally motivated by all the washouts that took place up in northern Wisconsin after the 2016 storms, when a lot of culverts got washed out in on Forest Service lands and Ashland Bayfield area. And we also do have a lot of trout streams, so that was certainly a concern. And that's how we went or why we went after it. But my question to you, Joanne, because I believe you're the one, and maybe it's also Michelle, interacting with the towns, what kind of reaction have you had when you bring the data to them? One of the things we have looked at trying to encourage them to go with larger sizes, because I see that often having just sat through town board meetings is they're going to go for the smallest size pipe that they possibly can to save money. And,
Right.
and we know that if they actually put the correct size pipe in, it will last much, much longer. And so in the long term, it is financial savings. So just curious what kind of reaction you had from the towns.
Yeah, I guess we're just starting to work in this arena, and we were contacted by the towns, or the DNR and the towns to date. But I think, yes, it makes sense that a lot of the towns don't have huge budgets, but I think we need to try to it's like a give and take situation, and anything we can do to encourage a slightly larger structure, or especially, I think you probably have run into this as well, that there's so many that are just have inadequate buried depth so that the water's shallow, and they just have to put the same structure deeper. It's just a placement issue. So so we haven't done a lot of outreach, though. That I'm not sure. Michelle, do you have any ideas on outreach? Or
Sure. Just maybe a comment or two, Keita, and thanks for the question. We upped the conversations a little bit this past summer with the towns, and word got around a little bit. We do send out to each town. They get like a fancy little bound, I don't want to call it a booklet, but of the information that we did collect within their town. And we haven't got a lot of feedback from them. It's kind of ironic that the towns that have come to us are sometimes the ones that haven't gotten that booklet or that information. So that's been kind of an interesting note. But I think it's the conversations that are kind of starting to circulate that seem to really be helping. And we haven't done a tremendous amount of outreach, to really hone in on this, and that's coming yet. We upped it this past summer from 2020. And we once again are upping it. If we get the grant in for this next summer, we'll be looking at it even more so. So I think we can certainly do more and be a little bit more proactive, with the educational outreach there as well.
Thanks for that, because I know we're looking to do that as well.
Yeah, and it is, and Joanne mentioned, and I've been on sites where Joanne mentioned the depth, and we hear that quite often. They just sometimes, it's got to go that deep, and so there are sometimes those disconnections, because we're looking at the crossing in a different manner. They're looking at it to, for a roadway, for moving people on top of the road, sometimes moving people under the road, because that's certainly part of it with kayakers or boaters and such. And we're looking at it as in, that passage organisms, or the soil erosion. And so hopefully those conversations bring all of that together. And we are certainly in a position, and we do want to be out there to be maybe not necessarily the funding source, but to be able to sponsor a town going in and trying to get some additional monies for making a bigger culvert or for making a better aligned culvert. But I do have just one, we had a participant share a little note here, and I was told that I could certainly share it with the group. And I do want to read this. Although triggered and made aware by the problems that occurred in Ashland County, Oneida County shows great foresight in being proactive in doing this work before serious problems would occur. Kudos to LWC. So thank you for that little comment. Thank you.
Yes, appreciated.
And I think maybe just any last bit of question, if there's anybody out there for another question, we've got a couple minutes, but I think we'll wrap it up if there's no further questions. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for coming, for tuning in, for giving a little bit of your day. We're excited. We hope you pass the word. Please reach out. I know Bear Bell put our website and our emails in the chat box. So please reach out. We love questions. If there's something that you need a little bit of help with or direction on, that's what it's all about. And so thank you everyone for coming. Stay warm out there, and we hope to see you again real soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.